Hey everyone, welcome back to Harl's Garage. On the last video featuring my 1997 Ford Ranger, I cleaned out my disgusting interior and got it back to looking new. At the end of the last episode, I mentioned that I was having some trouble with the check engine light. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I fixed all the problems in my truck and got it running back at 100%. The first problem that I had was a P1440 code. The P1440 code denotes that there is a problem with the EVAP, or evaporative emission system, in the truck. I first started by looking at all the EVAP vacuum lines, and sure enough, almost every single rubber hose in the truck, including those EVAP lines, was dry rotted out. A lot of times the P1440 code is thrown when the evaporative purge valve solenoid or sensor goes bad. I pulled the vacuum hose that connects to the EVAP sensor and purge valve and ended up replacing the entire fixture that included the lines with a Ford OEM setup. While inspecting the EVAP system, I noticed that my charcoal canister was also leaking. As seen here, when I shook the canister, the charcoal was shaking loose, falling completely out of the canister. This new aftermarket replacement came sealed and was a quick swap. Sometimes the P1440 code can be thrown as a result of a bad gas cap or fuel filler neck. I was having some intermittent issues with my fuel gauge reading properly, so I figured there might be a problem with my fuel pump as well. To inspect the fuel pump, this required pulling the truck bed completely off. To do this, I enlisted the help of my friend Andrew. First, we loosened the fuel filler neck from the truck body so we could remove it. Then, with a T55 bit, we started to loosen the bolts that secure the bed to the frame. With plenty of PB blaster and an impact wrench, we eventually were able to get the bolts loose and lift the truck bed. The truck bed, while not too terribly heavy, is just cumbersome to lift off the frame. While dirty, I was pleased to see that my frame only had minor surface rust and everything looked to be in good shape. We were right that the fuel filler assembly developed a crack in the rubber, allowing vapors to escape. Andrew next carefully brushed the excess dirt off the fuel pump connections so that we would not contaminate the tank. To access the pump, we had to remove the lock ring. Now, we had a limited number of tools on site, but Andrew was able to remove the ring without damage it using a flathead. Inside the fuel cylinder, we could see that there was corrosion in the unit, which most likely contributed to my sporadic fuel levels to be displayed on the gauge.
Not making very good contact if it is anymore. There's contact on that side first.
Andrew unboxed the new fuel pump assembly and got everything ready for the install.
It's a fuel pump and everything.
Yes. All in one.
We shot back the opening of the fuel tank to clean up the area to remove the excess dirt.
O-ring. In place.
The new fuel pump assembly, which included the O-ring, simply drops in place and the lock ring was reinstalled.
Orient it the correct direction. Fuel lines on.
After the pump and fuel lines were hooked back up, we replaced that cracked fuel filler neck. This new replacement fuel filler neck had a braided line for added strength. With the new fuel pump and fuel neck assembly replaced in the truck, we placed the truck bed back on and reinstalled the T55 bolts to secure it to the bed and reinstall the tail light hardware. I cleared the code, and I was happy to say that this fixed my emissions issue that I was having with the Ranger. Additionally, I needed new tires. The tires that were on the truck when I bought it were from 2013 and were dangerously close to failure. So I picked up these Mickey Thompson Deegan 38 all-terrain tires. While these are stock tire size, these tires work great on the road or in dirt for mild to moderate off-road use and provide plenty of grip in this loose sand. With the check engine codes cleared and fixed as well as a new set of tires, I put several thousand miles on the truck to make sure all the issues were solved. To complete the vehicle, I was going to finish with an oil change. However, when I began to inspect around the vehicle and check fluids, I noticed that not only was my coolant low in a relatively short amount of time, but my driver's side of my engine block was also pretty wet. Additionally, my temperature gauge would fluctuate heavily, meaning there was air in the system. My oil had also become milky from coolant leaching its way into the engine. So I enlisted the help of Andrew again, as he's experienced with rebuilding and repairing engines. And with the given symptoms, we figured that it was most likely a blown head gasket. So we pulled the truck into the shop and got to work. I started first by draining the remaining coolant, and you can see here the first problem. Look how dirty this coolant is. It's supposed to be a bright green color, however, it is near a rust brown. It probably hasn't been changed in years. With the coolant drained, I then continued by disconnecting the battery and removing the cold air intake, throttle cables, throttle body, live wires, and ignition coil. To do this job, you pretty much need everything up top to be removed. With all that removed, we then worked on the upper intake manifold, EGR valve, and loosened up the valve covers. With the valve covers off, Andrew next removed the lower intake manifold and pried it off the block. With the lower intake off, Andrew then removed the push rods, inspecting them for wear and carefully placed them aside in the correct order that they were in. Next, we removed the exhaust manifolds. We opted to leave them connected to the exhaust pipes for convenience and reinstall later. We did have a brief issue getting the exhaust manifolds to come off. All but one bolt on the passenger side came loose, as its threads were seized. Eventually, we were able to get the bolt exposed enough so that we could just cut it. With the exhaust manifolds free of the block, we could then remove the cylinder heads themselves. Looking at the old cylinder head gaskets, you can see just how many of the exhaust ports were blocked with corrosion and debris, as well as how damaged they were. Luckily, looking at the cylinders themselves, I was both pleased and relieved that they were pretty clean and not damaged. I then removed the spark plugs. I was also surprised to see that there wasn't much wear on them and they looked relatively new. However, one of the plugs on the driver's side, the side with the gasket leak, was heavily carbon fouled. I also forgot to mention I was getting some intermittent misfires here and there when going up hills or heavy acceleration, so this was likely the cause of that. Next, I cleaned the cylinder head surfaces by using brake clean and a sanding block so they could have a smooth surface for the new gasket to properly seal. With the surfaces of the cylinder heads clean, it was time to reinstall the gasket and new head bolts. Andrew started by tightening the bolts in the proper sequence by first starting at 25 foot-pounds. Next, Andrew added some red RTV sealant to the lower intake so that we could place the new replacement gasket on it and tighten it down. Andrew finished up the cylinder head tightening procedure by torquing the head bolts to 55 foot-pounds, then finishing with an additional 90-degree turn. While we let the sealant dry so that the gaskets could form and properly adhere, I took the opportunity to rinse out the upper intake manifold to remove as much of the carbon buildup as possible. I replaced the gaskets and it was time to reinstall the upper intake manifold. With the upper intake installed, we were near finished with rebuilding the top half. During the teardown, Andrew also noticed that my belt tensioner was warped and misaligned, so he installed a new tensioner and as well as a new belt. Everything went back together real nice, and we finished by topping off the radiator with some distilled water so we could begin the flushing process. But first, I pushed the truck out so the exhaust and remaining oils of the block could burn off. The truck turned over and sounded great. Once we got it up to temp, I began flushing the radiator. But you can see here how nasty the remaining coolant was in the block. The engine still had tons of scale and debris from the bad coolant, so I conducted a super flush. And I ended up finishing up this procedure by topping off with Motorcraft green antifreeze, making sure that I got it to a proper 50-50 mixture. I learned a ton from this repair process and saved a lot of money working on it myself. And since filming the bits of this episode, I put well over 1,000 miles and everything has since worked great. If you like this video, please subscribe, as in the next video I'll finally work on correcting the Ford Ranger's paint. Thanks again everyone, and I'll see y'all in the next video.